So now let's talk about the assembly workspace. So the very first thing that you are going to see in the assembly workspace is this assembly command manager. Now it will only show up when you are in the assembly environment, and we'll talk about switching to assembly in the next few videos. For now, we have started directly in the assembly workspace, and if you want to start this assembly, then you can do so using the full assembly, which is available in simple assembly folder. Now we have this full assembly, and inside this full assembly, we have some components and a subassembly. Now all these things are listed on the feature manager design tree, which is this one. Now we have the top level full assembly, which is this entire assembly, and inside this assembly we have this top level component, that's this base. We have this wedge, that's the second component, and then we have this subassembly, which is collection of several small components. Now this small subassembly is a collection of several components, and it's an assembly in itself which has been assembled once again in this full assembly. So you can assemble an assembly inside another assembly to create these kind of complex assemblies. Now after that we have mates, and mates are the things that keep all these things glued together. So we will talk about mates as well in next few videos. Now in this feature manager tree, we have some of these nomenclatures here that we'll discuss first. But for that, I'm going to expand it so that we can see this name clearly. Now the first thing here is this F symbol. Now this F is for fixed component, and usually the first and the base component is fixed. We fix the first component and then we add all the other subcomponents on top of that. Now in this case, this fixed component cannot be moved, but all the other components can be moved if you have allowed degrees of freedom using mate. Now in this case it is fixed, so I'm just going to make it a floating component first so that we can move it. So I'll select this, right click, and I'll select float. Now once you do that, SolidWorks will add this negative sign right next to components, and now these components are free to move. So if you try moving it, well, you can move it freely. You can just move these or any of these components. Now in this case, I just want to make it fixed again. So I'll go to this top level and I'll just make it fix. And now once again, this is fixed. And with that, all the other components are also fixed because they depend on this. And the degree of freedom for all of these other components are completely restricted using mates. Then we have the name of component, that's this one. And then we have its instance number. Instance number is the time when this component is used. So if you use a component for the very first time, its instant number will be 1. If you use it once again, it will be 2. If you use it 3 times, it will be 3, and so on. Now, if you use a component, let's say 2 times, and then you end up deleting the second instance, and then if you insert one more component, then the instance number will be 3 for the newly added component. So instance number is a gradually increasing number, and it does not depend on the number of times the object is added. So if you have added 4 copies of the same object, but if you have deleted a few copies in between, then the instance number will be certainly more than 4. So it just counts number of times you have added that component, irrespective of its availability in the drawing. Then we have the configuration name, and that's shown inside this parenthesis. It's default. Now if you have added configuration in your drawing, it will show up, and you can actually change your configuration as well. In this case, we have the default configuration for all of these assemblies and subassembly components. And finally, we have the display state. So the default display state is selected, and the name of that default display state is display state 1. If you have added display state, that's going to show up here. And of course, you can change that as well. Now, if you want to hide a component just to see what's going on inside, then you can select it. You can then select this hide component option to hide it. For example, in this case, we have this wedge. We want to hide it. So I'll select it, right click, and I'll select this hide component. And there we are. We can see it from inside. Now to bring it back, select the component, and you can just click again here, or select right click and then click here to bring it back. You can also directly click on the component, and from this flyout, you can hide or show it. Now you know what an assembly and subassembly is. Let's dig deeper into this subassembly. So we have a subassembly with several of these separate components, and we have inside this a fixed component, that's this base plate. And then we have all of these other components which are also fixed with respect to this. But then we have few components which are floating in nature, and these components can be moved freely because of this negative sign. But if you try moving it, well, none of these components are going to move, even if they are floating in nature. For example, this bolt, it is free to move, but it won't move in this case. Now that's because this subassembly is completely rigid, but you can make it flexible as well. And let's see how we can do that. So I'll simply collapse this assembly, this subassembly, then I'll right click and I'll select properties. So from here, you can select solve as flexible and click OK. And now this subassembly is flexible, and if you have floating components, you can move it. Also, if you look at this symbol, it will change to this. Initially, it was like this. For rigid assembly, it's this, and for floating, it's like this. Alternatively, you can right click on this assembly and you can also click this icon to make it floating or rigid. Once again, it's back to rigid, right click and just make it flexible. Now with this flexibility, we can move these bolts. There we are, we can move it. We can also rotate this bearing hub. So if you add flexibility to a subassembly, it will move its components if it is allowed using mates. Now finally, let's also talk about configurations. So inside this, we have a part called bolt with a configuration called long. Now this bolt has two configurations, long and short. But before we do that, before we check this configuration thing, let's hide this wedge. So I'll go to wedge and I'll hide it, so that we can see the bolts here. So this bolt has a little bit of tail here, both of these, but now let's change this configuration of bolt. So I'll select the bolt, I'll go to properties, and here is the configuration, which is long. Now we can make it short and click OK. And when you do that, just look at this, the tail is gone. So if you have configurations built into your assembly, you can change it. And of course, the name of configuration will show up here. Finally, let's talk about making changes in the assembly component. So here we have the wedge. First, let's just bring it back. And now let's say we want to make some changes in our assembly component. So we simply cannot do it right here. If you want to change anything, you can do it directly in its own component. So select that component. For example, in this case, wedge, I want to make changes here. So I'll select, right click, and I'll go to open part. Now this will open this specific part in its own window, and here you can make the changes. So I'm going to apply fillets on these corners. So I'll go to fillet and I'll just select this corner, and here we are, we've got the fillet applied. And with that, I'll simply click OK. The fillet has a radii of 10 mm and we are done. Now save the changes here. And when you save the changes here, it will be propagated to assembly as well. So I'll close it. Select yes if this prompt shows up. And here we are. The changes are applied to the assembly as well. So in this way, you can make changes in a component and that change will be propagated to assembly as well. And that's the overview of assembly workspace.